Rebuttal from Eric Voorhees. Take the podium, Eric. Yeah.
All right. So, Peter covered a lot of topics. I will try to remember most of the points that he was making and address some of them. First of all, I think we should cover for a second this idea that Bitcoin has no intrinsic value. This is a word, this intrinsic value, that I think a lot of Austrians have struggled with for quite some time. Nothing has intrinsic value. Intrinsic value is a meaningless term because value has to be subjective in the eyes of the valuer. Something that you think is intrinsically valuable, for example, like water, because all of us have to drink it, is only valuable if there's a human there that's thirsty. If there's a human there that's not thirsty, the water is not valuable at all. Before humans roamed the earth, gold had zero value whatsoever. There was no species or no sentient life that thought that that mineral was valuable to them. So value is subjective. Value comes when the person doing the valuing finds a good reason or purpose for that thing to use. This is true of gold. This is true of Bitcoin. Second, if there is such a thing as intrinsic value for the sake of argument, Bitcoin's intrinsic value, in this sense, comes from its payment network. And Satoshi did an injustice, I think, to the system by calling both the payment network itself and the unit of account, the currency, both have the name of Bitcoin. The payment network is the only way in the world that you can send a transaction to someone else in a decentralized way where no one can stop it, between any two people on Earth, no border whatsoever. It cannot be censored, and it is really cheap to actually do it. If that isn't valuable, then I don't know what is. Now, you may say it's not worth the price that Bitcoins are going for today, and that would be a valid argument. But to say that that system, which was the first in history to allow two people at distance to transact with each other, is not valuable, flies in the face of reason. Second, let's talk about volatility for a second. You are totally right that Bitcoin's current volatility would make it a very poor use of day-to-day money today. I will see that point absolutely. But volatility is not an aspect of Bitcoin which is intrinsic to it. In other words, volatility is what happens when the market is trying to decide on its value. Bitcoin is new, it is small. Over time, it will achieve stability, just as it has. When I got involved in 2011, it would move 50% in a day. Today, it's a big deal when it moves 10%. And I think 10 years from now, it'll be a big deal when it moves 2 or 3%. Stability as a market asset is earned with time. You cannot design something to be stable. So while Bitcoin is definitely too volatile today, I think that problem is self-correcting. Next, I want to address the multiple coins as inflation argument, which is that Bitcoin's not really scarce because there's all sorts of coins that can be replicated from it. Just as gold is scarce, and I can't make the claim that there are other metals, and thus gold is not scarce, I don't think that you can make the claim that just because there are other cryptos that means Bitcoin is not scarce. You can copy the code, but the code is not the network. You cannot copy the hash power of the miners. You cannot copy the infrastructure of all the wallets and all the companies that operate on the Bitcoin network. You cannot copy the brand, actually. You cannot copy that reputation that Bitcoin has earned in time. And we don't need to debate this on a theoretical level. We have actually seen this happening. So when we last debated, Peter, a few years ago in late 2013, there was about $10 billion as the entire market cap of Bitcoin. And all the alts, everything other than Bitcoin put together, was about $1 billion. According to your theory, if more blockchains happened and more alts came out, and more money even went into those alts, the market cap of Bitcoin itself should decline. Yet what we've seen is that alts have exploded. They're now $150 billion in value. And Bitcoin also has increased in value. It's now $110 billion in market cap. So if it was true that more coins and blockchains would debase the value of Bitcoin, the market cap of Bitcoin should be far less than it is today. And this doesn't have to be a mystery to anyone. A clone of Bitcoin's code is not a clone of Bitcoin. And then the last thing, so you, I think, are suggesting again that gold is really the way to have a modern society based on honest money. I would absolutely prefer that the world use gold than to use fiat. And I, again, am a big fan of gold, and I understand why it's valuable and why it's useful. But The point remains that it is not practical for commerce unless you are trusting some counterparty. And you, of all people, Peter, know that governments will not allow something to compete with their form of value if they can stop it. So if you want a market-based system of money that doesn't get shut down when it grows past the size of a novelty, it has to be decentralized. It cannot have an individual person or company or vault that can be seized. If that's what you have, then you will never actually have a free market financial system because the government simply will not allow it. Gold indeed was confiscated in the 30s. This is not some crazy idea. And even though gold worked very well in 19th century America, people weren't doing online commerce in 19th century America. The world has changed to some degree. It doesn't mean that the principles of money have changed, but it does mean that the form of money in today's economy that works the best may have changed. So with that, I'll leave it.
All right, a couple of points. First of all, let me try to go backwards. As far as the argument of government shutting down a competition, and we know they do this, right? I mean, they don't let people compete with the post office, but they allowed Federal Express, right? A lot of Uber hasn't been shut down. I mean, that competes with government monopolies on taxi cabs. So I don't think that governments are going to be too quick to shut down people transacting in gold. I do think that they're more likely to crack down on Bitcoin, as I said before, and I think it's easier. I mean, there's not that much anonymity in it. I mean, I've heard now that it's almost like a fingerprint. If criminals are using Bitcoin to launder money, now all of a sudden, it's actually a record of the transactions. The governments can go into the computers and kind of figure out, where these transactions took place. I mean, if I just hand gold to somebody, I mean, it's like handing cash. So I think ultimately, if the government's going to try to put a stop to anything, they're more likely to put a stop to cryptocurrencies. I think one of the reasons they're not doing it is because I think they pretty much realize they're going to fail. As far as the argument about the market cap, and I acknowledged early on, I wish I'd have listened to you earlier and bought some Bitcoin. The price of anything is a function of supply and demand. And even though the supply of cryptocurrencies has exploded, massive inflation, the demand has grown even faster. And so as long as demand is rising faster than supply, price can go up. The problem is what happens when all the demand goes away. So you said earlier that you know exactly what the supply of Bitcoin is going to be later, next year, next week, whatever, maybe fine. But do you know what the demand is going to be? There may be no demand. I believe that the majority of the demand is coming from speculators who are buying it because they want to sell it to somebody else. Everybody who's buying Bitcoin ultimately wants to sell it to buy something real. Nobody wants a Bitcoin, right? They want what they can buy when they sell their Bitcoin. But no one wants to sell it now. Everybody's holding on or hodling because it's going to 1 million, right? So nobody wants to sell. No one wants to be the idiot that gets out. But at some point, the bottom's going to drop out of the market, like all bubbles, and everyone's going to want to sell. There's going to be no demand. There's going to be massive supply. The whole thing is going to implode, which gets down to the concept of intrinsic value. And I disagree that it's impossible to have intrinsic value. And when I'm talking about intrinsic value, what I'm referring to is what you can do with the money absent its utilization as a medium of exchange or a store of value, right? There are things that I can do with gold, right? There are actual things that you can do with it that you can't use other metals because they're not a good substitute because they don't share the properties of gold. Gold is very unique among metals, and there are a lot of things that you can do with it. I mean, obviously, too. I mean, if you use cattle as money, you can eat the cattle, right? I mean, there are things you can do with it. But there is nothing you can do with your Bitcoin. That is the point on the lack of intrinsic value. If I don't have somebody who wants it, there is absolutely no actual demand for it. There is real demand for gold that always will exist, absent its functioning as money. And so that gives it a real floor. There's actual some tangible use. Sure, I mean, there's this big network of people that accept Bitcoin. So what? I mean, how many people have MySpace accounts? Right? That was a network. All right, well, Facebook came along. Oh, it was better. I mean, what's the odds? Think about all the technologies that we have today. Does anybody have the first cell phone ever made? Anyone have the first camera? The first television? The first automobile? No. Right? Someone comes up with a better one. So what's the odds that Bitcoin is the best cryptocurrency that's ever going to be invented? And so if it can be easily replaced by something that's better, because if you look at what you can do with it, well, I could do the same thing with any other cryptocurrency. But the problem is, even if there's a cryptocurrency now that's better than Bitcoin, and there probably are many, there are other ones that have yet to be devised that will be better than those. And so the problem is you can't use it as money. You can't store it. Just like I couldn't use the first cell phone as money, or I couldn't use the first car. All these products are losing value in the market as somebody comes up with something better to replace it. Right? Gold. Nobody's come up with a better gold. Thousands of years, people tried to make gold and they've succeeded. Alchemists. So we know that's real money, right? But these cryptocurrencies, without any real value. Now you say, well, you can make the argument. Well, Peter, the dollar has no intrinsic value. It doesn't. That's right. But what it has is the power of the state, and it has the history of use. I mean, the fact that it used to be backed by gold, and now it's not. I mean, the government's watered down our monetary system gradually over time. So we started with all this trust because we weren't just trusting anything because the paper money was backed by gold. But slowly, the government went off the gold standard and debased our money, and the dollar's been losing value steadily and slowly over the last 100 years. I mean, eventually it's going to collapse and it'll go away, but it's a slow process. But I think Bitcoin and all these cryptocurrencies, it's going to be a big process because again, right now, let's say the top was 20,000. I think there's a good chance that the market's topped out. Now, how long is it going to take before it zeroes out? I don't know. There's a lot of trading going on. People are buying and selling. I don't think there's any real capitulation yet. I don't think any of the long-term Bitcoin holders are scared that Bitcoin went down 70%, especially if they've been in it for a long time. But there's a big difference between when your market cap is as high as it is now and you have a 70% drop than when it went from $1 to 30 cents, when people lost their lunch money. Now you got people with their IRA money. You got people with big amounts of money in Bitcoin that got suckered into this mania between 10,000 and 20,000. And I think that, yeah, right now, Bitcoin's got a lot going for it because you got all these kids that are now, millionaires driving their Lambos, right? And everybody else has to tune out all the FUD, right? You don't want to, because they're afraid of missing out, all the FOMO, right? But once the market crashes and you get the horror stories of people that mortgaged their house and took out credit card loans to buy Bitcoin and now they lost their life savings, right? All of a sudden, all the stories of instant riches are going to be replaced by stories of big losses. And now the brand is tarnished. And now you've destroyed. Like a lot of these people that bought Bitcoin at 10, 15,000, when they sell out at a loss, they ain't coming back, right? That's going to be, so you destroy your market, you destroy the brand, and all this demand is gone. And all you've got left is a supply. Not just a supply of Bitcoins, but all the altcoins that were created during the mania and all that malinvestment that built up in industries to cultivate to it. It's all going to come crashing down just like every other bubble.
Thank you, guys. We are now going to the Q&A part of the evening. Don Smith, a big Bitcoin bear. Do you have the first question to ask? Take it away, Don. Yeah, hand it back to yeah.
Thanks, guys. It was a good debate. I wanted just to point out, I looked at the definition of a fiat currency. It's a currency that's not backed by anything tangible. And a commodity currency is a currency that's backed by something tangible or a commodity. So I think it's kind of funny that we're debating how bad fiat currency is when Bitcoin, by definition, is a fiat currency. The other thing I would point out, so by definition, you have to vote no on the debate. I also point out that you can't really buy anything with a fiat, with Bitcoin right now to speak of. I mean, there's a few places, but and when people talk about hiding money or avoiding taxes, well, anytime you want to buy something, you still got to run it through a bank. I mean, when you sell your Bitcoin, where do you have the cash sent to? It's got to go to a bank somewhere. So I don't think it's a very effective way of hiding money, or I don't even know why criminals would use it because they have to run it through a bank. So maybe you can explain that to me. I'd like to tell a story. I have a friend who, his wife came in and he said, honey, I didn't want to tell you this, but about 7 years ago, I took all the money out of our piggy bank and I bought Bitcoin. And he said, really? He said, yeah. And it just hit 19,000. And we want the good news. The good news is we're worth $70 million. And he couldn't believe it. She said, the bad news is I don't know where the code is to get the money. And to this day, I keep asking him, did you ever find the code? And he hasn't found it.
It's a true story, Don, right?
That's a true story.
It's a true story, yeah.
And So I want to know, where'd that $70 million go? I mean, who got it? And the other thing is, how do you, what's that? How do you, a Bitcoin does take a lot to manufacture. I mean, you got to buy semiconductor parts, you got to use a lot of electricity, so you can spend a lot of money to create wealth, except when you're done, there's nothing tangible. So you spend money to get rich.
Okay, Don,
so I get it.
Okay,
All right,
guys,
so that's
please
it.
hold. Don, you asked some very good questions. With all due respect, I want to make one point, Don. The resolution reads that Bitcoin will eventually replace government's fiat money. That's the wording of the resolution. So it's government's fiat money we're talking about in this particular case, for what that's worth. Thank you for your questions, Don. I think most of these look, you love Don, okay, Peter, but most of these questions are challenges to Eric. So Eric, you get first response. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Thank you, Don.
Testing. Is this on?
Yes, it's on. Yeah.
Okay. So, regarding your friend, that's really tragic. I mean, if you want to know where that money went, it went to buy us all of our Lambos. Actually, in reality, the freedom that people actually get and the sovereignty over their money that they get with crypto comes with responsibility. Losing that code was that person's responsibility, and it really sucks. But this is why it's important to educate people on how to use Bitcoin instead of getting distracted by things like the price. Second, you mentioned your definition of fiat being something that's not backed by a commodity. I wonder if you get your definition of inflation also from that same dictionary, because I'm guessing that it's wrong. Fiat actually means value by decree. It comes from anything that is valuable in a marketplace because some legal reason causes it to be valuable. Dollars are fiat now. When dollars were backed by gold, they were not fiat. Bitcoin's value, even if you think it is the most speculative and stupid investment in the universe, that value does not come from any decree. It comes from its desirability in an open marketplace. Bitcoin is absolutely not fiat. Next, you say that Bitcoin is not backed by anything. That's because Bitcoin itself is a commodity. Gold is also not backed by anything. It itself is a commodity that people will find useful for one thing or another. Bitcoin is the same, and people will find it useful for one thing or another. So I think I addressed your main points on that.
Yeah, my couple of points on it. On when it comes to fiat money, I mean, what Bitcoin has in common with fiat is even though a government didn't decree it as money, there's no law that requires anybody to accept it. What stands behind it is confidence and faith. That you certainly share a lot of confidence and faith in Bitcoin and its future. But I would argue that as a raw commodity, it has no actual utility, which brings me to a good point that I didn't get a chance to raise, and that is the incredible amount of resources in the form of energy that is required to create a Bitcoin. I mean, one of the arguments that people can have against the gold standard is that look at how expensive it is to get gold out of the ground. And then if we're just going to stick it in another hole in the ground and no one's going to see it or use it, it's an expensive way to run the monetary system. Now, I think those costs are small compared to the benefits of having sound money versus all the losses imposed by the fiat system. But if you're going to go to a cryptocurrency, at least find one that doesn't cost anything to create. I mean, why have to spend? It actually costs more money to mine a Bitcoin than an ounce of gold. And at least if I take that ounce of gold out of a vault, there is real value there. There's something I can do with that gold. I didn't waste all the resources mining it out of the earth. But the Bitcoin, once this Bitcoin bubble pops, all the electricity that was used to create those Bitcoins was a complete waste. We didn't get anything of value from all those valuable resources that were expended. And you mentioned William Shatner. What William Shatner is doing, he's got a power plant. And what he's doing is selling the power to the Bitcoin miners. He's not mining them himself. He's just selling these guys power so that they can keep on making Bitcoins. But eventually, the whole thing crashes, and no one's going to mine a Bitcoin if it costs whatever $6,000 to mine one, and they're only selling for $1,000 or $500. Then I guess the mining shuts down until the cost comes down.
Thank you, Peter. Again, I want to tell the audience that for a very special reason, that resolution says it will eventually replace government's fiat money. Now, Erica is implying that's a redundancy, so to speak, but I meant to put that word in precisely to finesse this issue of fiat money. It's government's fiat money, so that you are still voting on a robust resolution. It will replace government's fiat money. But moderator's prerogative to ask you a question, Peter. The argument is about the value of gold is that first, it trades as a monetary metal, just as Bitcoin trades as a monetary currency. But second, in the case of gold, if it no longer traded as a monetary metal, if there was no demand for it as such, it would collapse in price because its value as an ornamental industrial metal is quite limited. So that 90% of the reason for gold's price is exactly the same as the reason for Bitcoin's price. Could you respond to that?
Well, I would disagree. I mean, first of all, I don't know how you can ascertain that 90% of gold's value comes from its use as money when hardly anybody uses it as money today.
It trades as a precious monetary metal.
Right.
It responds, that's
But-
how it trades. That's the argument.
Well, but that's not what it's being utilized for today. I believe
That's how its price
no,
trades.
No,
That's how it trades.
I don't know how it's traded. I mean,
Okay,
it's not
you don't.
traded for
Okay.
that. It's traded just.
Peter Schiff
people,
does not know how
but
gold
you
trades.
don't know
That's
what.
a scandal.
If
Bear that in mind.
if somebody
He doesn't know.
If
Go
somebody
ahead.
is buying gold,
Yeah,
you don't know.
yeah,
I mean, you have a lot of industry
yeah.
people in there that are in the gold market trading. But I would say that if gold was priced as money right now, it would be priced a lot higher than $1,250
I didn't say
an
that,
ounce.
Peter.
It
I
might
said-
be $10,000 an ounce. Right now, gold is basically priced for jewelry. It's not priced as money. It's not being circulated as money. It's not being saved. Central banks have some gold, but they probably have less gold now than they've ever had in their history. So I don't think there's much of a monetary premium currently built into the price of gold.
Peter just made a fascinating statement about gold. We might have a debate about that. Gold trades as jewelry. Fascinating
It trades
statement.
as a commodity.
Yeah,
It is not being.
It doesn't trade
is
as a
not
precious
being-
metal. Okay.
It is not being
We understand.
traded right now as money.
Okay, we have your statement.
And people are, portfolio managers aren't buying it as insurance. Nobody owns gold, right? If they
Okay.
want insurance, they use derivatives or they use something else.
Okay, you made yourself. One final question from the moderator, from my moderator's prerogative, and now, sorry, having to do with the degree to which the government can enforce its will with respect to gold or with respect to Bitcoin. The question for Eric, especially, Peter said that despite the fact that I think he sort of concedes, the government concedes gold. It did under Roosevelt. Gold was unlawful to own, and of course, obviously, it's difficult to hide gold, whatever. It is obviously a physical commodity, much more vulnerable. But on the other hand, Peter said, well, but they can say to banks, everybody, look, you could get caught trading Bitcoin, 20 years in prison. What about that?
Yeah, well, the government could absolutely outlaw Bitcoin.
Yeah.
It's not
Just
gonna-
as easily as
It's-
gold? Yeah.
Well, more easily, because there would be fewer people that would resist that. Today, a lot of people still think that Bitcoin is just used by criminals because that's what the media likes to tell them. I guess I would bring up a few points on that. One is that governments have a super poor record of successfully banning anything. They can write on paper that you're not supposed to use it. I'm not aware of any time in history where that actually works. Murder itself is banned by the government, and yet people get killed all the time.
Okay, just one. Peter, a question. Gold versus Bitcoin. Peter said that it's easier, in fact, for the government to outlaw Bitcoin use as money than to outlaw gold use.
I agree with that. It
You
is
do?
easier to ban Bitcoin than it would be to ban gold because of popular sentiment.
Enforceability?
However,
Enforceability,
it
yeah?
would be harder to enforce it. Right?
Okay, that's the key point.
If
Yeah.
you have $10 million and you want to move it somewhere on Earth, if it is outlawed, that gold is probably not going to move. Or if it does, it's going to be a black market transaction that requires a huge amount of expense in order to do that, just as it would to get drugs across the border. I can send $1 billion of Bitcoin anywhere in the world without anyone knowing about it.
Yeah, but
So
the problem
the
is
enforceability is not
But the
even
problem
close.
is, if it's illegal, no bank is ever going to convert it into a currency. So the person you send it to is going to have to keep it and only give it to somebody else who wants the Bitcoin. But then, of course, since you're doing this all over computers, governments are going to be able to track it down, figure out what address, what computer, figure the wallets out, and they can come and they can catch people. I mean, I think it's harder if somebody physically hands somebody a gold coin, unless the government is physically, following you around. That transaction is more in secret than something that's done over a computer network where government agents can be monitoring the transactions and trying to figure out, what's happened. So I think it will be easier to ban Bitcoin. But I want to mention one question on your gold that Gene brought up. Sure. It costs. I mean, the average mine to mine an ounce of gold now is, I don't know, $1,200, $11. I mean, it's expensive to mine gold. So if you thought gold was only worth $100 an ounce, nobody would be mining it.
No,
and so
yeah.
the only gold we would have to make anything, it would be the existing gold.
Lots of
And
it.
the price would have to go way up unless everybody was going to melt down their jewelry. If you wanted to make new jewelry, there'd be no new gold coming because nobody would mine it.
Especially since the government is sitting on 1 billion ounces, but
Well-
they won't let it go, right?
Yeah, but so the point is there is some natural floor. I know, when you talk about the cost of mining Bitcoin, that's nothing than the cost. There is a real physical cost to extracting gold from the ground, and that also creates a base value for the metal because you know you just can't get it for free.
How many people? How much gold is held by investors and speculators? Just physical gold held by investors and speculators.
I don't know the quantity, but it's
It's
very
immense.
small.
Very small. Okay.
Compared to what
All
they
right.
hold in stocks and bonds and stuff like that. It's a tiny.
Compared to the gold supply, the above ground gold supply, how much is it?
That I don't know the exact
No.
amount.
Okay.
Do you know?
All right. Yes, I do. It's immense. But
Well,
anyway,
how immense?
Well, it's about one third.
Well, one third? That's not that much.
One
So
third of the entire gold supply.
So
is held by
2/3
speculators.
is not being held by
They
investors.
would dump it all. They would dump it all on the market. But
What
I
if all the big whales dump their Bitcoin? How many?
yeah,
What
yeah.
percentage of Bitcoin is owned by the top 100 wallets? And how many of those wallets are owned by the same guy?
I was only trying to address your issue of intrinsic value of gold. It could be valued as a metal that you put in your teeth or the ornamental, but that's far less than its price. I'm surprised that you think the price of gold only responds to jewelry demand. A lot of people disagree
I'm
with
just
you.
saying that
But,
today there's very little investor demand for gold. I know, I sell it.
yeah.
You know, sales are down like 80%. No one wants gold right now.
Peter is in a bad way with his business, and
That Bitcoin's put me out of business.
he's getting $2,000 honorarium tonight, so that's going to keep the wolf from the
I
door.
am?
Yeah. You didn't know? Yeah.
No.
You are.
I'll take it.
Oh, did you expect more?
And gold